Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I came prepared with a nice large portion of watermelon rinds from the freezer. I bought them down here maybe a half hour ago, perhaps a little longer. They're beginning to melt a little bit, but for the most part they're frozen solid. That won't last long. The stuff will thaw out. It'll just dump all of its moisture. The lucky recipients of that meal are the two newest systems in my wormery down on the lowest shelf, straight across from us. They're the European nightcrawlers on day 10 here in their new systems. Getting feeding number 1, actually. We put them into their new environment, which consisted of nothing more than bedding. And the idea was to just let them settle into that, and that their first feeding would come today during their first check-in. And when it's about brand new bins like these, it's usually not just about those bins still, because in a way we're still tied to the material that those worms that live in those two tubs had created in their previous environments. And that stuff's been left here, basically classified as harvested castings at this point, but still the idea was that we would deploy a bait box to see if we could round up straggler worms that might still be lingering in this stuff. And I let this stuff sit for 10 days now. I just set this bait box up a moment ago. It's pretty much brand new. Over the past 10 days I did come in and aerate this stuff a little bit, try to help it get a little bit more dry and a little bit more I guess inhospitable for worms to want to remain in. And that's the whole idea. The bait box is going to hopefully draw them in. And we did an actual experiment getting the worms out of their old environment using bait boxes to transport over a test object, which is some wool fabric. So why don't we get these systems up on the bench now that we've already covered the bait box in the old system, trying to round up stragglers, and we're going to get to giving these guys their first feeding. Let's get to work. So like I said, these systems have been in service for 10 days now, but now take yourself back to even 7 days prior to that. So 7 days prior to the worms getting hauled out of their old environment and placed into here, that was when these bait boxes got deployed. Up until then, we had been 5 weeks into what had ended up in the end being a 6-week migration of the worms out of their material. The first 5 weeks were just your traditional horizontal migration, and then for that last week we bought these plastic containers into the game because we wanted to have some place to keep the wool fabric that's still holding together slightly. I mean, if I tug on this stuff, it just totally tears in my fingers, and whenever I do sort of test, materials and stuff like this, I do prefer to not help the breakdown process too much by tearing at it or chipping away at it or anything like that. I'd really just prefer to watch it all get broken down on its own without my help, and basically see how long that takes. So we didn't put any food in here. There was really no motivation other than a really large amount of moisture that's down in this bin, in both bins, put out there to motivate the worms to want to venture out of this container. And I don't mind, that was the whole idea, was that the wool composting experiment would continue, and as the wool fabric deteriorates and breaks into smaller and smaller little bits and pieces on its way to getting completely broken down, it seemed easier to help keep everything together so we can keep an eye on how it's progressing by using these plastic boxes. But I mean, now what do? Do I drop in a couple handfuls of frozen watermelon right on top of these little guys? I think that would cause them to be a little bit uncomfortable and probably end up leaving the wool. But the allure of that watermelon is probably irresistible to a worm, so they'd be back soon, I'm sure. I guess the best way to feed the worms occupying the wool, I suppose, would be maybe with the other material I bought down here, which was the coffee. Since it's not frozen, that could just get dropped in here as their part of their meal up here on top. And then down low, which is really the new environment that we created for them, is where, ooh, look at that, we got a nice turnout. And I wonder if that's just me disturbing the container, causing them to drive down and out. I don't know. So yeah, I'm kind of liking that idea. And it is nice to see a lot of worms down there, but now I do question whether that's just the way it was, or is that the way it is now only because we caused it. Doesn't matter so much. We had a good bit of moisture in both systems, and the bedding we created for them was really beautiful. So let's see, perhaps out here if we find worms in this material, which there are, not directly below the plastic, but other places, just to see if worms have occupied the material, and you can see they certainly have. So what we saw when we lifted up the plastic tray could very well have already been in part that way, with worms venturing down into their new home, which they're welcome to do. That's the whole idea. I just got to come up with an interesting way to keep the worms engaged with that wool fabric so that it continues to break down. And I think the best bet is going to be to make sure I'm giving them foods that are not frozen. It would have been nice if I had a whole bunch of really tempting stuff that we could just drop right into there. But the only stuff that I've got is the coffee that we can do that with, I believe. So let's see here too. Yeah, worms all over the place. Yeah, these systems are definitely off to a really lovely beginning, if you ask me. I think giving everything a nice stir here, as well as giving ourselves an opportunity to inspect how things are coming along after 10 days in service. This is my first check-in on the systems ever since we launched them 10 days ago, so I didn't peek. What we're seeing here together is totally the result of 10 days of the worms feeling pretty comfortable about the stuff we created for them down here. This bedding was kind of special, and I figured it would be a hit with the worms because it includes a bunch of this leaf mold stuff that I pulled out when I was doing some gutter cleaning. And then I sifted it down and I ended up with this really beautiful 5 gallons or so of leaf mold, partially broken down leafy matter, which to me seems like the worms have really been enjoying a lot. So I think our feeding is going to look sort of like this. We're going to drop in the coffee on top, because that I don't feel like I'm causing trouble. You can't even see we fed. It just blends right in with the material in there. And that leaves us with a couple pieces of coffee filter, which traditionally around here are associated with the feeding. I know we're going to be feeding watermelon too, but that stuff I'm thinking we just kind of create a pit for down the middle like we usually do and drop it in there. I even have a few napkins that I'd really like to compost away, so I'm going to include them. I didn't really prepare with much bedding for today's check-in other than a bunch of napkin. These are these big luxurious napkins I bring home from my mom, and I just figured out that they're 3-ply, so I actually pulled apart all 3 layers of the nice thick fluffy soft napkin, and now I know how thick it is. I always sensed that it was pretty thick, but I never had pieces that would easily come apart the way these did. I guess these got used just enough to let the layers start coming apart from each other. So pulling them apart was quite easy, actually. All right, looks like we got ourselves quite a nice first meal for these little guys. I hope they appreciate it. And just to top it off, try to give them everything they need. Since I don't recall if I included any of this stuff when I first built the bins, but I probably didn't, is grit. So the grit can go in here as an accompaniment to their foods. And I would think between coffee, watermelon, and, well, perhaps the napkins aren't that interesting, but the napkins too, whatever, that they count too as part of what the wormies are getting here today. Hopefully they like what they're getting. I'm curious to see how they're going to continue with the wool sweater. Next time I definitely need to think ahead a little bit and thaw out some stuff, some really good stuff, some stuff that's going to get them all over that wool and working it hard. And I believe that next time we'll just put the food on the wool only, and that might cause worms to come back up out of the bed below in pursuit of that whatever that yummy food's going to be. But I do like the idea of keeping the worms, you know, working this stuff, working it, and don't want to let that stop. So kind of a weird way to be running this, but it's all for the sake of letting us track the progress of the wool fabric. It did seem to me like we were ready to bring those old systems to an end and harvest those castings, get the worms working on some nice fresh material, some nice fresh bedding. And the wool fabric took a lot longer, is still taking a lot longer than I thought it would. It's my first try at it, my first foray at composting wool. But I think they're doing a great job. Very nice job so far. So we'll see where this leads. And that's it for the first check-in with the now 10-day-old European nightcrawler systems getting feeding number 1. And I guess the only thing left to do here is to get some stuff cleaned up, put away. But I'm not going to waste your time with that. That's boring. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Before I go really quick, I'm noticing some flying insects. So they just suddenly came out of somewhere. I don't know, maybe out of the plastic bag. But all of a sudden I looked down and I could see movement. So before we conclude here, I don't even know if I've ever added any mosquito dunks to these systems, but now we can officially say that we have. All right, everyone, really quick before I go to get stuff cleaned up and put away, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.